Well, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Jason Levine, and thank you so much for joining me today for the Friday Masterclass. Back in 2023. Very nice to see you all. Had a bit of a little hiatus there, and very glad to be back with you. So today we're going to be covering how to mix a podcast, and this will actually pick up where we left off at the end of last year, where I was doing some stuff around sort of using and automating a gate and a compressor in the context of working with live podcasts. So today we're going to cover a whole bunch of different things and sort of 3 or 4 different, I hope I can get through all of them. I will try. We'll see how successful I am. First stream of the year. To go through a couple of different ways that you, one, may have recorded your podcast and things that you would do for that, whether you have everything sort of combined into a stereo or dual mono waveform, or if you actually have separate stems of each guest. And then at the end, we're going to revisit one of the video podcasts that we were working on at the end of last year and talk about doing some environment and sound design replacement. So in the case of that particular podcast, you may remember a colleague of mine was interviewing people at Adobe Max, and there's a lot of noise and a lot of things that I had to remove. Well, often when you do that, it can leave things not necessarily sounding artifacted, but just sounding weird because you see people and things walking around and happening, and it loses, you lose a connection to it. So one of the techniques for sort of putting you back in that environment is to recreate the environment, but at a very sort of subtle, barely audible level. And that just is some simple stuff by kind of recreating the sound of a room and then adding back in some sound design, sound effects, i.e. sort of people, crowds, halls, and we'll talk about where you can get some of those sound effects. So as always, we're coming to you live on Behance, YouTube, and the Twitters today. So thank you so much for joining. A couple quick shouts. Got Muhammad Arafat here, Reverb Mike, Tim, McCorn, very nice to see you. Oliver Andrews, how's it going? Sam Peterson, and Robert, and Katerina, Mustafa, Kevin, how is it going? Evan Gozali, really nice to see you all. Hugh, thank you so much for joining. Now, before I get started, you may have noticed that things look a little bit different. The lighting's a little off. So right at the beginning of the year, I fell ill. And prior to that happening, I'm redesigning the studio. So I pulled everything out. In fact, I'll switch the camera view here very quickly. You can see a little behind the scenes inside view. So I pulled out, you can see all the keyboards are gone. I ripped out, half the cameras aren't set up, half the lights aren't set up. There was also a new addition to the studio, right there. And that is one of my new favorites, a vintage Slingerland drum set with vintage 60s cymbals. This was acquired over the holiday. And yes, I do groove like it like a mother. I do groove on it like a mother. Pfft, blew that line. Which you'll get to see eventually once everything is mic'd up and ready to roll. But I got sick and I wasn't able to finish the studio before today because I've just been a little low energy. So hopefully in the next 2 weeks I'll have everything restored. It's gonna look a little bit different. I'm not gonna have the same kind of spaceship-y keyboard setup that I had before. Changing things around, taking some of the keys out, getting rid of all of the nonsense. So, you know, I'm not one for putting stuff on my desk anyway. I had some like vintage game things and a Bendy and the Ink Machine dude. All of it must go. Clean surfaces and nothing else. Anyway, that should be in the next week or two. So in case you're wondering why things look a little bit different, that's why. All right, so without further ado, let's get into it, shall we? Nice drum kit, says Rob. Fancy. Oh yeah, it's great. It's fantastic. It's so great. And it's hard to tell exactly because Slingerland, I'm a huge fan of Slingerland. Their serial number system, so basically the kick drum I know is from 1968. Some of the other drums have slightly different, the toms and the snare they don't have matching serials. They're sort of within the range, but they're right at this period in 68 where Slingerland, I don't know if they were bought or redesigned or the factory moved somewhere else. Anyway, they sort of started over the serial numbers. So I know for a fact the kick drum is from 68. The other drums could actually be from 1975. I'm not entirely sure. But the cymbals, which includes a 22-inch, 3,200 gram sizzle ride with original, and they're all Zildjian, non-branded Zildjian, classic 60s. That cymbal is freaking, it's the bomb. It's amazing. My good friend Fred Fung used to have this same cymbal, a 22-inch 69 Zildjian ride. And again, it was like 3,000 grams. It's phenomenal. And it's so heavy and the sizzles are amazing. And then I got a pair of 1970 or 71 rock hats, heavy, 1440 gram, top and bottom, same weight for both. They're phenomenal. And I tuned them Ringo style, so they have a lot of growl. And anyway, can't wait for you to hear them. I did a test recording the other day, and they're fab. Okay, so on to the task at hand. So we're talking about different ways to mix a podcast. So I'm going to start with, and this is from, I think I've told you before, I've been doing an internal series as a producer with a colleague of mine now for a little over a year. And we have traditionally used StreamYard to do the recordings because everybody's sort of remote. So StreamYard, not unlike whether, if you were using Zoom or something like that, kind of similar. And a year ago, basically, now I rerouted things slightly differently so I could record the podcast directly into Audition. I wasn't using the StreamYard recordings because they would give you an MP3 when you were done. I can't remember if they would give you a wave or not a year ago. Maybe. But it wasn't great. So I rerouted a way to kind of do it into Audition to get slightly better quality. Now, of course, when you're recording a podcast over the interwebs, you are kind of at the mercy of, one, your guest's connection and whatever gear they have, and then also the client that you're using, right? If the thing has like a momentary glitch or a hiccup or something, so it goes. Sometimes you'll hear it while it's happening. Sometimes you might not. Sometimes, for whatever reason, you're not getting the bit rate that you want, and you're kind of stuck with it, if you don't have a chance to reschedule. So these will kind of showcase different examples of that. So these are all done with StreamYard. Now, I will also point out, because I'm a fan of StreamYard, as of, I think it was, I can't remember, June or so of last year, StreamYard offered a method where it would automatically provide wave stems of any meeting, any StreamYard session that you did. And you can have up to 10 guests if you have their pro plan. So you would get individual streams of everyone talking. Awesome. Breaks things down, makes it a lot easier to mix. We'll show some of that in a moment. But again, you're still kind of, at the mercy of your guests, right? If your guests are in a terribly if they're in a bathroom, where they record their TikToks, your sound is gonna suck. And you're gonna have to do a lot of work to make it better. We've had people all over the country, all over the US, a couple people like in New York, small, high-ceilinged, echoey apartments, no carpet, kind of a nightmare. And then, using like a laptop mic, not some kind of external microphone, you just run into some issues. So we're gonna cover some of the ways and techniques to fix some of that, and then just some of the overall things to keep in mind when mixing a podcast to really give it that sort of broadcast kind of sound. So this is from, this is one of the ones that we did about 8 months ago, maybe 9 months ago. This is my colleague Teresa and this incredible new creator named Berna. And let's just have you take a quick listen to some of the raw material here. And again, this was tracked directly into Audition as a stereo. Now I say stereo, it's dual mono. Everything's in the center, right? Now that's something we're gonna talk about too in a couple of moments here, because we did some live recordings at Max, not the video ones, but like in a hotel room, that isn't weird, like at a table, separately mic'd, recorded into Audition, separate tracks. Those are beautiful sounding because the production was, in a treated environment with proper microphones, proper everything. So that you could create some stereo. Now I've talked about that. Do you want to create stereo for a podcast? Differing thoughts there. In general, not really. If it's just talking, you want people to stay focused. You want to kind of keep everything in the center. But I will show you how if you have the opportunity to split things around and it makes sense, you can create just a little bit of ambience and a little bit of environment by very minimal panning, but still maintain good intelligibility. And that's what you want. You want to keep people engaged. If you do like wide stereo, I think I mentioned this before, I heard some stupid Atmos podcast, everything. It was just stupid. Ugh, so stupid. Two people talking in opposite ears. Good job. Real great. Like it if you will, though. Good for you. Okay, let's take a listen.
Yeah, so let's talk about your journey. Before you became a solopreneur, an entrepreneur, and your own boss, you were
So that's
at
Teresa.
Instagram as the teen community lead. I remember talking to you about that. What made you quit your job and just do this new thing on your own?
So this is Teresa. She's the host. Now, again, she's actually recording. She's connected via StreamYard. She was in the Adobe Studios where Paco, who's here, used to record our live broadcast there. So she's in like a proper room, slightly sound treated, good connectivity. She has a proper condenser microphone. So hers is pretty clean. Now, again, I'm recording her via StreamYard. So I saw a couple of people just ask, what's the compression like? It varies. In general, you're getting the equivalent of, I would say, it's not exact, 192-ish kilobit sort of audio. If I have to relate it to an MP3 sound, maybe as high as 224-ish. Little bit more of those frequencies above 16K are kind of barely visible, but it's good, but it's sort of unpredictable. And again, if your guest is not in a great environment and doesn't have a great mic, that can exponentially go down. But in general, the StreamYard audio is great. And I'd say that in an ideal environment, like I used to use it here, 224 kilobit when everything's rocking. So, you've got fiber, everything's good. It's gonna sound great. Stereo, whatever. Okay, here's the guest.
And be your own boss. What was the tipping point?
Yes. So when I started at Instagram, first of all, before starting at Instagram, I was living in New York City as a freelance writer. I was working for the New York YMCA.
Okay, so right away, you're probably going, oh, that sounds pretty good. Yes, because Berna also had a great mic. She was in, some room, wherever this was still kind of lockdown time. So nice room, clear carpet, pillows, not echoey. So I remember telling her when we got on, we're doing the pre-call, I'm like, oh, this is gonna be amazing, because we had just recorded someone else in like an echoey, high-ceiling New York apartment with, pictures on the wall and no carpet, in like a, vertically challenged, not, I guess vertically, well, it wasn't vertically challenged, it was vertically high. Anyway, not the greatest environment. So this sounds great. So right off the bat, the first thing you have, don't say expressions. One of the first things you need to do is evaluate, what do I need to do to this to make it sound better? So again, just to kind of talk through some of the process here, typically, I'll just go through and then see, all right, what are we looking at here? So here we have our spectral display. Again, this kind of gives you the idea. Now look, you can see right here, we've got signal up to 20K. Now, part of this is because of the way I've rerouted this through Audition. So we're getting some of the benefits of sort of resampling here, but you actually have transient peaks going all the way up to theoretically, 24, well, not really 24. Maybe if you zoom in, you'll see some, but we definitely have some signal here registering up to the 20K range. So again, like theoretically, we're sort of in like a, an AAC plus, if that makes sense to anybody who uses iTunes and stuff, or what used to be iTunes. You get good quality coming out of this. Zoom, not always the case. I despise Zoom for these recordings. That's why most real pros, they don't want to use it because it sucks. Teams, I like Microsoft Teams. We use it for meetings. Audio quality wise, sorry guys, it's not great. It just isn't. You're very good at spreadsheets though. So when I look at this, what I can see is that there is some persistent noise here in the dead space. And again, maybe that's coming from Teresa's environment. Maybe that's coming from the guest environment. It looks to be sort of fairly consistent. I don't know if all this is coming through on stream. Yeah, you can see it right there. So it's there. So, but because it's, this very dark purple, as we've discussed before, that means it's very low amplitude. So I don't necessarily need to do anything to that just yet. You can see it right here, okay? Just a little slight amount of persistent sort of shh. And my guess is that's probably below 2K. And sure enough, if I zoom in right here, yes, that noise is below 2K. And because it's purple, it's very, very low amplitude. So it's barely audible. In fact, if I even tried to play that back, yeah, I mean, we're at like minus 72, minus 60 something. So you're not hearing any of that. So that's nothing to be concerned about. Okay. So the first thing you want to do is you want to work with a compressor, a really good, fast compressor to just even out the dynamics. Now, as we've discussed before, if you take a look here, I mean, again, a lot of this has to do with the microphone that you're talking into, or you or the guest. But, the dynamics are, in general, fairly even, okay? So this is the guest talking, this is Teresa talking, this is the guest, this is Teresa. I mean, I can just see, just by looking at it, I can see who's talking and when. So there's not a lot that we need to do, but we want to even things out. It's just going to make the overall volume, again, a little bit louder, a little bit more unified. And this using compression, a little brain fog, using compression is just going to draw people into your podcast. That's what keeps people engaged. If you have too much dynamic variation, they're just out of it, right? So you just want things to be very present. So I'm first going to showcase this with one of my all-time favorites. I've shown it here on the stream before, which is the formerly Uri 1176. This is the Waves version of that, which they call the CLA 76 compressor. This is an all-time classic in the studio. I used this when I was at Berkeley all the time. Never owned one, unfortunately. It's great for almost anything. It's a go-to for vocals, but primarily what's so great about it is that it's what's called an FET compressor. Super fast. It has an auto threshold. Right? I'm not going to get into all the settings. We've discussed this in previous streams. The threshold is sort of determined by the ratio that you're choosing. Now, I get asked this all the time. What's a good ratio for like podcast or broadcast voice? I've said it before. In general, usually about 4:1 is where I'll go for something like this, because again, you can use the input here to give it a little bit more boost, to hit that threshold a little bit harder, to even things out. You don't want to completely squash it, because then you're going to kind of lose some of that amplitude. You want to just really tame out of band peaks. And as I look at this, decibel-wise, there's really maybe as much as about if there's less than an 8 decibel difference in general, like overall between loud or mid-loud and loud signal, use a smaller ratio. So my first go-to would be something like a 4:1. That's going to give you a very broadcasty kind of sound. Now with this particular compressor, again, very easily we have our attack, which I've got set to around 3 milliseconds, okay? Again, I said use a fast attack. Some of that has to do with the compressor itself, the way that this FET field effect type compressor kicks in. It's just very fast and very musical and very seamless. You don't want to do the fastest attack, because then you're just going to start to clip those attack transients of the talking, and then you can end up with like weird pumping and breathing. 3 to 7 milliseconds is usually where you want to be. Right? Now again, some of that can do with the way that people are talking, but in general, about a 3 millisecond attack with a ratio of 4:1, that's going to do it. And then here, I have a super fast release as well. Now this control 7 is actually fast, 1 is slow on the release here. So these equate to different settings. So again, it's not milliseconds. It's an arbitrary value here. So this is a super fast release, and you'll see it on the VU meter when we play this back. So let's go ahead and turn this on. And in fact, here I'll start the playback, and then I'll turn it on. So here it is without, and then I'll kick it in.
Yeah, so let's talk about your journey. Before you became a solopreneur, an entrepreneur, and your own boss, you were at Instagram as the teen community lead. I remember talking to you about that. What made you quit?
Okay. So you can see we're hitting about 4 to 8 decibels of gain reduction, right? So remember, at 4:1, that means for every 4 decibels above the threshold, it's 1 at the output. If we're at 8 decibels above the threshold, it's 2 at the output. So we're between like 4, 7. It's, again, some of those peaks are going a little hotter. That's fine. But notice how it just sounds very seamless.
First of all, before starting at Instagram, I was living in New York City as a freelance writer.
Okay,
I
let's
was
kill
working
it.
with the New York YMCA. I was doing lots of teen programming, and I was
It's
very
fine.
broke, extremely broke.
Right.
I had
Kick it in.
$12,000 of credit card debt and around $40,000 of student loan debt, and no idea how I was going to pay any of it off.
And you see how quickly the VU meter is recovering as she's talking? Super fast release, okay? Again, in this case, it's the fastest that I can go. It sounds really good, and it doesn't sound like it's overtaking or you're getting any kind of weird pumping. It's just even. And I used very little output gain here. All right, now again, this doesn't equate to additive, because you can see here 0 would be this is kind of working in this kind of negative logarithmic scale on here. So we're at minus 21.9 for the output. That value is arbitrary to you. When I turn the compressor on and off, the volume is effectively the same. Maybe it's like half a decibel louder, because I'm not trying to use this to add amplification. I'm trying to use it to just smooth over and kind of glue over those peaks just to make it really present. We're going to make it louder in a second. So I did this just to kind of illustrate how this works. Mohammed's asking, can I re-edit the waveform project later, as in Premiere Pro, Photoshop? Yes, of course, and we're gonna talk about that, the editing part of it, in just a second. So yes, of course you can. All right. So this is again a third-party one. Many of you will not have this. Let's do the same with one of our native effects, which is my again kind of a go-to here: amplitude and compression, tube modeled compressor. So in the tube modeled compressor, we're basically going to use the same general setting. So I've got a ratio of 4:1, an attack of 3 milliseconds, the equivalent kind of release time to what that 7 equated to. Again, it's sort of variable here, but between like probably 70, 69, and 90 milliseconds, maybe even as much as 110. Release, you have to kind of listen. If you're getting kind of a weird, if you sort of hear the compressor going in and out, adjust the release time, all right? And you can do it dynamically. You can do it as you're listening. You'll hear if you're getting this, like, if you hear it kind of battling, like it sounds like the voice is kind of going in and out, your release is either too fast or if it's not, you're not hearing it go in and out at all and it actually seems like things are quieter, your release time might be too long. So again, 3 millisecond attack, about a 90 millisecond release. And then all I need to do here is adjust the threshold. Now, in this case, again, to match what that output setting was, probably need about 4-ish dB once I compress this accordingly. So let's go ahead and play this and I'll adjust that threshold while we're listening. All right, here we go.
Just a little background on me. I'm Filipino American, first gen, daughter of immigrants, and both of my parents are very working class, and we had there's no financial background for my parents or even for me, no financial education background.
Okay, so again, pay attention to the gain reduction meter here. Remember, we were seeing things go about, -4, -7, -8, a little bit -10. So this is a digital meter, so it's a little bit different than looking at the VU. But ideally, we want to be in the red somewhere around this section that I'm circling right here, right? And as I play around, let's go back to Teresa here. That's what we should be seeing.
Talk about your journey before you became a solopreneur, an entrepreneur, and your own boss.
Let's do some output gain.
At Instagram as the teen community lead. I remember talking to you about that.
And let's do the on and off.
What made you quit your job and just do this new thing on your own and be your own boss? What was the tipping point?
Yes. So when I started at Instagram, first of all, before starting at Instagram, I was living in New York City as a freelance writer. I was working for the New York YMCA.
Okay. So you hear, when I turn it on or off, the output sounds the same. Initially, before I added output gain, it was quieter because we're squashing it down, right? Threshold's at around -23 dB. We're hitting that same, kind of floating between, we got to be at least 4 decibels to take advantage of that 4:1 ratio. And then we're going maybe on some of the peaks as high as -10, right? Maybe even -12 for just a momentary second. That's fine. But it doesn't sound like it's kicking in. It's just evening things out. And that's going to be amazing because that's going to keep us really fluid and just kind of keep you in that conversation, okay? So again, tube model compressor, certainly nice. Yes, Umacorn, deaf hear it. Excellent. Knew I could count on you. Okay, so we've got the compression in there. Now, the one other thing that I will typically do in a case like this, where I have everything baked into a stereo waveform, all right, is I'll add, again, one of my favorites, which is another plugin I've shown here many times, which is the L3 Ultra brick wall limiter. Now, an Audition equivalent of the brick wall limiter would be something like the multiband compressor brick wall limiter. I'll show you that at the end. Again, I just like this because it has a slightly more analog-ish sound. But the key settings here are the output ceiling and the threshold, okay? Now, note that I have the volume of this down. In fact, I usually mix these at around -3, okay? So we may not actually necessarily hit minus 0.2. Now I talk about this a lot. I always tell you, never mix to 0. Never do that. You shouldn't. Always mix at least a tenth of a dB below 0. Ultimately, there's going to be some music and other things in here playing around it. And I could add compression or whatever at the end. I generally find you don't really need to do that because your music, especially if you're using like Adobe Stock Audio, it's already compressed. It's already mixed. It's already delivery ready. So that makes it really easy then if you just mix the podcast, the talking, you don't need to add additional compression to the end, all right? Is this controversial? Yeah, I mean, can you? Sure. Can you make it louder and louder? Yes. I'm going to show you here, though, you don't need to because podcasts are generally delivered at around the reference level for them. I believe Spotify delivers them, I think, at minus 14 LUFS, minus 14 loudness units relative to full scale. In doing this method here, I'm going to show you a couple of little quick tips. We can probably get this to around minus 11, which is plenty loud, maybe even minus 9. It doesn't matter. And then when you go to something like Spotify or wherever, they ultimately bring it down anyway for delivery. The point is, you don't need to make talking as loud as, a Cardi B single. That's not pleasant to listen to. So it doesn't require a lot. But you adding a little bit of limiting on the end is just going to, again, make everything just a little bit louder, a little bit more present, and just kind of pump things up so it's just that much clearer. So in the case of this, I set the output ceiling to around minus 0.2. Again, I'm probably not going to hit that here. And then I've got my threshold in this case. Again, we can just use it dynamically as we're listening. Let's just kind of skip ahead here and turn this on and play this back.
We need someone to help edit if you know how to use Adobe Premiere. And I was like, totally. Do I know how to use? I had no idea how to use Adobe Premiere. So I had to teach myself, much like the budgeting. I was like, I know, I love it. And then they stuck me in a room and I was like, YouTube, how to use Adobe Premiere. I got hooked. I got addicted. I had been using iMovie at the time, and there was for my own videos that had, it was not money at the time, but other stuff. And there was so much more I needed to do that I wanted to do with my videos. I wanted things to pop up behind me. I wanted pictures to go in and out. I wanted things to look like the way they look in my brain.
Okay. So as you can hear, it doesn't make it super crazy loud. It just makes it a little bit louder, kind of pushes things forward, right? Stop saying right. Wonderful. Now, as mentioned, very quickly, you can do this just real quick. You can do this. God, we're already at 11:58. With the multiband compressor, but you're going to disable, bypass all of the compression bands, and then you're only going to focus on the limiter here. So if you wanted the equivalent setting, it would be 0.2 for the margin. Or does it even let you do fractional in here? Yeah, there you go. And the threshold, again, you would just set accordingly. So in the case of this, let's just play it back again.
Small kids travel show network in New York City. And the owner of the company was like, well, we need someone to help edit if you know how to use Adobe Premiere. And I was like, totally. Do I know how to use? I had no idea how to use Adobe Premiere. So I had to teach myself, much like the budgeting. I was like, I know, I love it. And then they stuck me in a room and I was like, YouTube, how to use Adobe Premiere.
Okay, so really very, very similar sound. Again, same settings kind of effect. Again, the attack release is a little bit different between the two, but this one actually sounds great. I happen to really like this too. So that's how you can achieve that same sound. Now, one thing you may have noticed, maybe over the stream, now I am kind of hearing a little bit of that. Remember that noise that we saw before that was kind of inconsequential? It's coming through a little bit. So just to point out, and again, we're not going to do this because it doesn't need to be done here, but just as an option, one of the things that you can do is do some very basic denoising of a file in advance, because when you compress everything, it's only going to make that noise a little bit louder, and it doesn't require a lot. So you can do this with the the classic noise reduction where you take a sample of just that noise, and then I'd probably remove about 70%. Like here, if we were to do a noise print just of that signal, and then go into noise reduction here. Oh, my phone just turned it. I can't see the comments. All right, noise reduction, I do, come on, stupid Face ID, idiots. I would do about 70%, reduce, do I even need to reduce it by 30 decibels? Probably not. spectral decay, you could leave it like 2%. All right. It's so quiet and it's in such a fixed range anyway, you're not going to hear it, but that would be minimal. You wouldn't, and then select the entire file to get rid of that. So just to kind of show you what that would look like, I'll let it process. And that's just going to get rid of all that noise without affecting other frequencies. Okay, and you can see it, it's gone. See that? Nice. So now when I go back here and play this,
I got hooked. I got addicted. I had been using iMovie at the time, and there was, for my own videos it was not money at the time, but other stuff. And there was so much more I needed to.
It's really nice, okay? So just an idea, something you might want to do. It'll vary. I have instances that I'm going to show you next where Teresa's side was totally clean, but the guest had noise, like hum. So I had to kind of separate things, all right? So it changes. It can be very variable when you're doing stuff over the internet, right? That's why there's actually a lot of different services now that do sort of, quote unquote podcast recording that offer better fidelity, some better than others. Honestly, like I said, StreamYard, if the guests have the right gear and they're in the right environment, it's very, very workable. All right, so just to kind of cut to a finished version of this, all right, after I've done, so again, not showing you anything you didn't already see, there's the compressor, there's the limiter on the end. One of the things that I'll do when I kind of cut these things is I like to go through and color code as I'm making the edits, right? So I edited everything non-destructively here with crossfades in the multi-track view, all right? So all the edits are done here non-destructively this way. Just gives me a lot of flexibility. Teresa is in this blue color, so anytime you see this blue, that's Teresa. And then just because sometimes I need to affect sections differently, I group all the edits of the guest together, but in different colors, right? So, because sometimes, again, maybe a section needs a treatment. Maybe there's some weird noise. Maybe something, I don't know, her air conditioning kicked in that section. I can process that separately by dragging it onto another track and doing it separately. It gives me a lot of flexibility there. But as mentioned, once I have the podcast, right, I add my music. Now, this original series, I did in fact license an Adobe stock track. In later editions, I composed it for her. But just to give you an idea, here's what that sounds like. And by the way, there's no limiting or anything else on the master, and I'm going to show you why. All right, so just take a quick listen here. I'm going to let you hear the intro.
Welcome to Humans of the Creator Economy, our brand new weekly podcast that brings this emerging community straight to you. I'm your host, Teresa Au. My guest this week is Berna Anat.
Okay. And you can hear, again, that music, it's already mixed, it's already mastered, it's already finished. So, to add a lot of effects and limiting to the music, and there's like some percussive elements in here.
And my producer. If you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions,
all right, it would just sound weird. So I don't compress the music, I don't touch it at all. It's already finished. Now, if I were recording it live into the session, that would be a different story. But because I'm using a prepared track, it's just not necessary. So let's go ahead and do a quick mix down of this. And then I'll just show you my final little kind of, not a trick, but the final thing that I do to this at the end to kind of show you. So here we go. So let's do mix down entire session. And I'm going to call this the Berna mix. Let's put it on the desktop. All right, 48K, 32-bit, okay. All right, and while that's doing that, just gonna flip over to the cam here. Actually, I'll just leave it on the screen. Let's see. See if we have any questions, any cues. Yes, output gain is the same as makeup gain in all compressors, yes. High infidelity. I see you're back on tour in 2023, Mike. That's excellent. Okay. And we're already done. Sometimes Audition's mixing capability floors me. Okay, so here we are. Now, as mentioned, right? I don't want to recompress the music. I don't need to necessarily. It's got some nice dynamic changes here, but look at the dialogue audio. Look at that. It's not too loud. It's not a solid brick, but it's nothing getting past that ceiling there. That's the hard limiter, right? That's the ultra. Really nice, really present. Now, I could keep the differences on the end, the top and the tail here, but again, it's on for such a short duration, I don't want to do that. So I could probably buy back about 3 decibels here if I just limit this to -6. Now again, a 3 decibel change, a 3 decibel limit where we just have transient peaks here, you're not going to hear this. It's not going to overly compress or distort the music in this case, all right? So what I will typically do, and I have a formula for all of these things here, is I just go ahead and add our hard limiter. I limit to -6 based on this. Again, these are my levels. I'm not telling you to limit to -6. It's just how the mix turned out, right? Remember, the hard limiter ceiling was -0.2, 2 decibels below, but we weren't hitting that at the output because I had the volume fader attenuated. So we've got plenty of headroom here. So I'm going to max amplitude in this selection, -6. No input boost. I'm not trying to make it louder. I'm just trying to tame those peaks. I'll go with the default look ahead and release time. Click apply. Again, it's, this is probably -7 or something. That's okay. It's a dB and a half louder. That's cool. And then we'll do the same thing at the end over here. Just going to repeat that last command. All right. Let's shave off the ending here. Nice little fade out. Get rid of that. All right. We don't need to tail it, but we will top it here. And you can even see there's a little digital click. This was actually in the music file. Their own music file wasn't topped and tailed before submission. So that would give me a little click if I were leaving that alone. So we're just going to fade that in. All right, destructively there. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to now normalize this, right? And normalization does not affect the dynamics of everything at all. All it does is say, what is the loudest peak here? And then let's make everything uniformly louder based on a decibel setting that I use here, which in this case, I'm going to normalize the whole podcast to -1.5. Not 0? No. Not -0.2? No. Not minus whatever? No. -1.5. Go ahead and click apply. Okay. Again, this is kind of what it looks like. Nice, big, thick, healthy waveform. And now when I go into amplitude statistics and I run my scan, okay, here we will now see that our loudness is right at around -12.45 LUFS. So again, a little louder than the podcast standard, but perfectly within sort of that legal range. And again, if you look at the more classic RMS value, it's actually right there. It's like -15, okay? In fact, I think Apple initially was normalizing to -16 LUFS, not DBFS, LUFS. All right, and if we just take a quick listen here, go to the end. It's gonna be a bit louder, but again, it should be fine. It's just dialogue.
As a video, it is very hard for me to focus on anything else. And so I'm editing it just all from my phone.
Yeah, I think my audience will really love this conversation. Good luck, and thank you so much, Verna.
Thank you so much for having me, Teresa. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to Humans of the Creator Economy.
Okay. Clean, nice, simple. Sounds great. 2 or 3 things. Compress, limit, only on the dialogue. If you have music that's already been pre-mixed, do what you want. You don't need to add effects to it. Yes, you could EQ it, and we'll show you an example of that in a second here. But in general, don't need to do that. And then normalize everything at the end after you mix down, okay? Now, let's see, how much time do I have? Oh, 20 minutes, barely, 17 minutes. Okay, this one, I'm gonna show you this. I don't need to talk too much to this. So this was another guest, awesome guest named Chimdi. She was in a location that was very, very echoey. I'm just gonna let you hear a little bit of what that sounded like. So this is the raw, again, StreamYard stereo recording here.
Welcome to my podcast, Chimdi. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so let me.
Why you quit your full-time job and moved to New York City? You don't have to be free.
I had to be free. I was born to create. I was blocking my blessings. I used to work for a nonprofit that was focused on educational leadership. I like got I got multiple degrees in like public policy.
Okay. So if we've listened to podcasts where they bring guests on, pretty typical sound. This is what most rooms sound like, right? So it was I did it again. So that was a challenge to match kind of her voice with Teresa's. And as you may have noticed, even Teresa's voice, it wasn't particularly clear. And for whatever reason, on that particular session, now again, we're still seeing the same kind of 20K peak here, but there was just data missing. So I don't know what was going on that day, but the recording it was kind of, overall, everybody was just sort of muffled and crummy. So this was just an example of where I needed to add one more element into the chain. And because Teresa's audio, even though it was a little muffled, it was still on a proper mic, it sounded pretty good, totally separate from Chimdy's audio. So in the editing process, you saw before how I color-coded everything. I had to not only color-code, but break out Chimdy into her own track here and separate her and process her with a whole different series of effects, including EQ, compression, so EQ before the compressor, and then after the compressor, a little bit of denoising. I didn't want to denoise before the EQ or the compressor because it was already a compromised web compressed signal. So I kind of needed to get everything as good as I could, get it louder and even, and then take some of the bad away. So again, a lot of people always ask, like, well, what's the process if you have something that's like something like this, where the audio is sort of compromised, noisy? Do you denoise first? Do you EQ first? It just depends. In the case with this, the audio was simultaneously muffled and echoey. There's a lot of transient loss, so there's a lot of moments where she would say things you just kind of missed the attacks. Again, probably just a laptop mic or whatever, just the environment. So it required some EQ, then compression, then denoising, then limiting to make it generally louder. And, as you can see in this particular session, Teresa's all at the top here. She too had some EQ. So let me just play back a little bit of what hers sounds like here. Take off the effects first. Well, here, I'll leave the compression and limiting on and just start with the EQ off.
It seems like your audience is super engaged with you and what you're doing. And I love the two-way conversation. It's not just like you putting content out there, but you're also getting stuff back. Since the last time we talked, I know you use Premiere Pro because you mentioned it. And then you said, I wish.
And it's really, there's not much here. I just cut a little bit at 220. So again, getting rid of some of that muddiness, a little boost, dB and a half or so at 5K. That's it. Teresa's was good. Primarily, I needed to just take away some of the mud, which was automatically going to make those mids and upper mids stand out a little bit more. All right. Didn't want to do too much because the audio was already compromised based on just the web connectivity that day. Again, not the connectivity, just the service that day. Chimdy's, again, this was there was a lot going on here. So here's the original audio, and I'll leave the compressor and the limiter on there.
Netflix television host, and so she very much has a podcast. Very much is living the life where I'm like, okay, girl, you created the pathway for me.
All right, and here it is with the EQ and denoising.
Television host, and so she very much has a podcast. Very much is living the life where I'm like, okay, girl, you created the pathway for me. And I went on her Instagram and clicked on hers, and she had the same one. And I was like, I like this. Just a little bit more customization, and that's the one I chose. So in general, I look to the creators that I admire, that I follow, and I see what they're doing. I see where they're moving. And I'm like, ooh, would this be a good fit for me? And I give it a try. And if it doesn't, if it does, then it's awesome. And if it doesn't, then that's cool too.
All right. And again, now you're probably saying, oh, that I hear a little bit of smearing. Is that the denoiser? In general, I'd say yes, it is. Now, I'm only using about 33% across all frequencies, but no, that is just kind of that MP3 artifacting of a web recording. And particularly if you're in an echoey environment, and she was saying that her connection wasn't great. Well, I remember that when we recorded it. It's New York. The connectivity is weird there sometimes. So, and it was like in an apartment building. So not fiber, and who knows, right? So it just, the signal was bad, transients were being clipped, there just wasn't a lot of intelligibility. So in this case, the EQ that I was using here, again, before the compressor, because I needed to get things into a state where we could just see what's there, cut fairly significantly at about 110, cut even more at 320, boosted at 3.2K, okay, and then boosted at 10K, all right? So this one just required a little bit more, just to, again, bring out the intelligibility. Now, somebody might have asked, or I may have seen it in here, we have this new beta product called Adobe Podcast, and it'll take audio and you can, it'll fix a lot of different types of audio. I tried it on this. Here's the thing. When you already have something where, in particular, you have sort of compromised frequency loss, particularly where transients are concerned, the AI, it tries to figure out what those transients are. It doesn't always get it just right. So it wound up sounding it sounded like drier, clearer in that sense, but it wasn't actually more intelligible. Having the kind of ambience of the room, in the end, actually sounded better. So that's what I went with. But I would check that out, podcast.adobe.com. You have to sign up. It's a sign-up beta, but it's definitely worth your time to check it out. All right. Nice. Okay. All right. So that was a little bit on chimneys there. Okay. Now we got 10 minutes here. So the last example that I want to showcase is around having that super clean studio recording of the podcast. And again, just to showcase to you that for this one, the only difference is that I added a little of ambience and a little bit of spatial room spatialness, that's not a word, a little bit of space back into the podcast because it sounded nice and because they were in fact across a long table from each other. So here's the raw, untouched, totally mono version with Teresa and this super cool guest. Her name is Gigi Robinson. Some of you may know her. She's all over Instagram. She's been in Sports Illustrated. She's really something else. Take a quick listen.
Hello, Gigi. Thanks so much for being my guest today.
Thank you for having me. This is so exciting and so fun to be here. I'm really excited.
I know, live from Max. Can you believe it?
Live from Adobe Max, flew in from New York City 2 days ago.
Okay. And again, because this was recorded a la, proper mics in a treated room, you can see once again that, Teresa's levels, and this is, of course, Gigi talking, they're apart from each other, so there's not total separation. I gave Teresa some beta 58s to record this. However, when Teresa's talking in between Gigi, it's completely silent. So again, I wasn't unfortunately setting the levels there, but it's just the way, I don't know exactly how they were facing each other, but there's like total rejection on Gigi's side, which is great. It just makes it that much cleaner. But the point is, super clean, really, really easy to work with. So the final version of this one, I use the exact same processes. Now, by the way, this is what I wanted to say about that though. Talking about editing and cutting this down. So one thing that I will typically do, now I had separate stems here. Now remember before, I was editing everything in the multitrack non-destructively. Now I could have done that here with the 2 stems. The truth is that can sometimes get a little messy because I'm not necessarily, the cuts, making it across 2 tracks, I might move things around, fly things around differently. I don't like to work that way. So because these were clean, because they didn't need any pre-treatment, now I could have pre-treated them with EQ or whatever, or denoise, I basically did a very, very slight pan. So I did approximately, I think, about a 10 to 15% pan on each of these. That's it. 15% is almost imperceptible here. And then mixed this down to a stereo wave file. So ultimately, what I was working with in the edit and what I edited was a stereo wave file of the 2 of them, which is what you see here. Just easier. Just like I did right with the other StreamYard ones, it just makes it a lot easier. It's just so much cleaner. sometimes editing across multiple tracks like that for a podcast, again, you're taking a risk, right? You're mixing down, you're committing to that balance, but the balance was good, right? So, and I'm using my ears to listen to that. So again, same effects applied. LA 76 here for compression, ultra limiting on this one. And then the last thing that I did was to add a little bit of spatial reverb. And for this, if you take a listen, now again, remember these were pre-panned. This is, again, now you could do this with the studio reverb. This is one of the ones that I happen to like. It's called H Reverb. It's another Waves plugin. Note the reverb time, 0.63 seconds. This is a fairly slightly reflective, sort of bright room, okay? And if you take a listen, I'll turn this on and off. Here we go.
Hello, Gigi. Thanks so much for being my guest today.
Thank you for having me. This is so
kill it. Here we
exciting
go.
and so fun to be here. I'm really excited.
I know, live from Max. Can you believe it?
Live from Adobe Max, flew in from New York City 2 days ago, had the Express Ambassador Summit yesterday. I mean,
What did you think about the summit?
I think that it was incredible to be in a room with so many like-minded creators.
Right? It just, I said it again. It just adds just a little bit of dimension. There was already, from the compression, it was already amplifying. Granted, it was a carpeted hotel room, but there was some reflection in there. So it was already amplifying it, but the voices were still a little clean. I wanted to actually bring out a little bit more of the room. So it doesn't sound like they're, Atmos. It just gives it a little bit of space. Just a little bit. Little bit, not a lot. Still sounds fairly centered so that you don't lose focus, all right? And that's how I mix this down. So this is something that you can do. Now, would I do this with those other sort of frequency compromised StreamYard ones? One, no, because they are already in mono. Two, no, because adding something like that is just going to smear those already softened transients even more. And that's not gonna sound good. But if you have separated stems or you have just really clean audio, I could have done it with the Berna one, right? Remember, again, I was able to separate her too from Teresa. It can add a little bit of just niceness if it's too dry. If it's already sort of clean and bright, I mean, you don't really need it. Again, there shouldn't be any echo. It's just more about just a little bit of dimension, slightly different. And it was a nice change of pace to have that on the cast. Okay, so the very last thing we're gonna do here in my 3 minutes, 2.5, if Premiere will launch before the show ends here, I wanna just show you, again, the finished video podcast and using sound design to bring that environment back, right? We just, I have a disease. It's in the vernacular now, saying right after everything. It's actually listening to too many of these podcasts because all these podcast guests seem to say that, right? 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 Gah! I don't have enough dollars to fill the jar. All right, let me open this up. What are the norms and standards that you recommend to apply while the sound and acoustic synthesis processing for a better audio quality? Yeah, I mean, already kind of went through this, right? So I just said it again. So compression, limiting, maybe EQ. You can do that via the tube modeled compressor and the multiband compressor to be used as a hard limiter. That would be my recommendation. So here is, this is the Jerry and Justin Wen, Jerry Wan podcast from Max. And I just wanted to point out here, so what you'll see is, this is the finished edit. I've actually already mixed down the gated audio. So what we have here is, well, here, I'll just play a little bit of this so you can take a listen to it.
Everything is a little less painful. It wasn't always so easy, right? As for many creators, what we
right.
share on social media is not reality. I think there's a fine line between
All right, cut that is not visible there for some reason.
incredible week here in LA.
Give back and teach others all about the creator economy. So I remember you did
Why
some
is that camera
LinkedIn
not on?
audio events, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so again, nice and clean. Now, because I'm using that gate, you're hearing some of that background sound gate out. And remember, I had to do an enormous amount of denoising on this. It was crazy noisy. We don't have time to showcase that. Here's what we do. First, we add in, again, some space using that same reverb.
Those were awesome. I mean, I think when it came to like the rise of Clubhouse, right? That was a big buzz.
Puts you back in the room, and then add a little bit of crowd.
When it came with audio, and then LinkedIn.
All right. In the background.
Live interaction with the people that we'd been interacting with, like.
And now it just sounds totally wonderful, totally clean, totally nice. But we are out of time, so hopefully I'm not going to get the band hammer. Thank you so much for tuning in. We won't see you next week. We're on replay. We'll be back the week after that. Have a great rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. And we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.